The stars had witnessed countless conquests. For 3,000 years, the Dominion had spread across the galaxy like a slow-moving plague. They were patient hunters, these creatures. They did not rush. They did not make mistakes. They simply appeared above a world, made their demands, and watched as civilization after civilization chose survival over pride. High Arbiter stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Submission, and watched the blue and green world rotate slowly beneath him. Earth, the natives called it, a small planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. The dominant species called themselves humans. They had achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries ago, a mere blink of an eye in galactic terms. They were children playing with fire, unaware that adults watched from the shadows. Had conquered 11 species personally. He had seen the look in their eyes when his fleet blocked out their sun. Fear, desperation, and finally acceptance. It was always the same. The mathematics of survival were simple. Fight and die, or kneel and live. Every species capable of building a civilization was capable of understanding those numbers. The High Arbiter was tall even by standards, nearly 3 meters of armored chitin and dense muscle. His 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern on his elongated skull, reflected the planet's light like polished obsidian. He had earned his position through 1,000 years of service, through blood and patience, and absolute dedication to the Dominion's expansion. Today would be his 12th conquest. The communication arrays hummed to life, broadcasting the ultimatum in every human language. The message was simple: surrender unconditionally, accept integration into the Dominion as a labor caste, and be permitted to continue existing. Refuse and face extinction. They did not make empty threats. 3 worlds across the galaxy stood as burned examples of what happened to those who chose pride over survival. Waited, the response usually came within hours. Governments would convene emergency sessions. Military leaders would calculate odds. Philosophers would debate the meaning of existence. And in the end, someone in authority would make the rational choice. The first response came not from any government building or military installation. It came from a small house in a human city called, from a device that the humans used for long-distance communication. An old female human, her voice crackling through primitive speakers, spoke 2 words in her native language. The translation software processed the message and displayed it on screen. Go home. The High Arbiter's mandibles clicked together in what might have been amusement. A malfunction, perhaps, or a single defiant individual who did not speak for her species. He ordered the ultimatum repeated. This time, the response came from everywhere. Every broadcast tower on the planet began transmitting simultaneously. Every satellite relayed the same message. Every communication device, from the most advanced to the most primitive, carried human voices speaking in hundreds of languages. The translation software struggled to keep up, but the meaning was clear. No, 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 no. The word repeated endlessly, a planet-wide chorus of rejection. Felt something he had not experienced in centuries: confusion. He had studied human history in preparation for this moment. He knew they were a violent species, prone to fighting among themselves over trivial differences. He had assumed this would make them easy to intimidate. A species divided against itself rarely found the unity necessary to resist a common enemy. But the response was not coming from governments or military commands. It was coming from ordinary individuals, farmers and teachers and factory workers, children and elderly, rich and poor. They were not waiting for their leaders to make a decision. They were making it themselves. The tactical officer approached with a data pad. The information it contained was troubling. Human military forces were mobilizing, yes, but not in any pattern that made strategic sense. They were not concentrating their strength or establishing defensive positions around vital targets. Instead, they seemed to be dispersing, scattering their forces across the planet in small, independent units. More disturbing was what the civilian population was doing. They were not evacuating cities or seeking shelter. They were going about their daily routines as if a conquest fleet had not just appeared in their sky. Factories continued production. Transportation systems operated normally. Children attended their educational institutions. But beneath this appearance of normalcy, something else was happening. The Dominion surveillance systems detected unusual activity in residential areas. Private workshops and educational facilities were drawing unusual amounts of power. Communication channels that had been dormant were suddenly active, encrypted with codes the systems could not break. Summoned his science officer, a younger named Al who had specialized in analyzing conquered species. "Explain their behavior," he demanded. Al studied the data carefully before responding. "They are preparing for war, High Arbiter, but not a conventional war. They know they cannot match our military power directly, so they are preparing to fight a different kind of war, a long war, a war of attrition." "That is foolish," said. "A prolonged conflict will only increase their casualties. The rational choice is immediate surrender." Al's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of uncertainty among the "I believe, High Arbiter, that they have made a different calculation. They are not weighing lives against lives. They are weighing freedom against survival." The concept was foreign too. The Dominion had conquered species that valued honor, species that valued tradition, species that valued 1,000 different abstract concepts. But those values had always bent under sufficient pressure. Threaten a species with extinction, and even the most honor-bound warriors would eventually kneel. It was mathematics. It was inevitable. The first invasion forces launched the following morning. 50,000 warriors, each one worth 100 human soldiers in direct combat, descended on the major population centers. They expected resistance. They were prepared for tactics. They had conquered species who fought from shadows before. What they found was something else entirely. In a human city called Moscow, the invasion force encountered its first obstacle: traffic. The humans had not fled their vehicles. They had parked them in the streets, creating a maze of metal that slowed the advance to a crawl. The warriors could have destroyed the vehicles easily, but that would have taken time. And while they dealt with the obstruction, human snipers fired from windows, disappearing before return fire could find them. In Beijing, the water treatment facilities had been sabotaged. Not destroyed, but contaminated with a chemical that was harmless to humans but caused violent illness in. Half the invasion force was incapacitated within hours. The old woman who had sent the first message of defiance was found dead in her home, killed by a patrol. Within a day, her face was on every screen on the planet. Her name was Maria Santos. She had been a teacher for 40 years. She had and great. She liked to garden and play chess with her neighbors. The humans did not seem to care about strategic value. They cared about Maria Santos. They carved her name into walls. They painted it on bridges. They whispered it to each other like a prayer. And everywhere her name appeared, the resistance grew stronger. Watched the reports come in with growing unease. In 1,000 years of conquest, he had never seen anything like this. The humans were not fighting to win. They could not win. They knew they could not win, and yet they fought anyway. A human philosopher, captured during a raid, was brought before the High Arbiter for interrogation. He was old, with white hair and deep lines on his face. He showed no fear as he stood before the towering alien. "Why do you resist?" asked. "You cannot defeat us. Your mathematics must tell you this." The old man smiled, an expression that showed his teeth. Such an expression was a threat. Among humans had learned it could mean many things. "You're right," the philosopher said. "We cannot defeat you, not today, probably not tomorrow, maybe not in our lifetimes. But here's the thing about humans. We're not very good at mathematics when it comes to freedom. We're not rational about it. We never have been." "Then you are fools." "Maybe, but we're fools who would rather die on our feet than live on our knees. And here's something your mathematics probably didn't account for. We're also very good at holding grudges. We remember. We teach our children to remember. And one day, maybe not soon, but one day, there will be enough of us who remember. And then your mathematics will change. Had the philosopher executed, but he found himself thinking about those words long afterward. The invasion continued, cities fell, millions died. But the resistance did not weaken. It grew. Every atrocity, every massacre, every act of cruelty seemed to strengthen human resolve rather than break it. In the quiet hours of the night cycle, alone in his quarters, began to wonder if he had made a terrible miscalculation. He had conquered 11 species by threatening them with extinction. But what happened when you threatened a species that was willing to be extinct rather than surrender? The war was only beginning, and for the first time in his long life, High Arbiter was not certain of victory. The war entered its second year with no end in sight. High Arbiter had expected resistance to crumble within months. Instead, it had spread like a virus, infecting every corner of the planet. The Dominion controlled the skies, the oceans, and every major city. They should have won. By every measure of conventional warfare, they had won. But the humans refused to acknowledge their defeat. In the occupied city of Chicago, a patrol moved through empty streets. The silence was more disturbing than gunfire would have been. The warriors had learned to fear silence. It meant the humans were planning something. The attack came from beneath. The humans had been digging for months, creating a network of tunnels that connected basements and sewers and abandoned subway lines. They emerged behind the patrol, struck with improvised weapons, and vanished before they could respond. 7 warriors died in the ambush. The humans lost no one. Similar attacks happened across the planet hundreds of times a day. They were superior in every measurable way. They were stronger, faster, better armed. Their armor could stop human projectiles. Their reflexes could dodge human attacks. One warrior was worth 100 humans in direct combat. But the humans refused to fight directly. They poisoned water supplies with chemicals they called capsaicin, extracted from a plant that grew in abundance on their world. The substance was food to humans. It caused excruciating pain, blindness, and sometimes death. They contaminated ammunition with biological agents that their own immune systems could handle but that ravaged biology. They turned everyday objects into weapons, vehicles, construction equipment, agricultural machinery. A farmer in Kansas named Tom became one of the most wanted humans on the planet. He had converted his combine harvester into a mobile assault platform, armoring it with scrap metal and mounting captured weapons on its frame. He led raids on supply convoys, disappearing into the endless fields of grain that the Dominion forces could not patrol effectively. They sent an entire battalion to capture him. They found his farm empty. They found his neighbors empty-handed and innocent-looking. They found no evidence that Tom had ever existed. But that night, another convoy burned. In Seoul, a 17-year-old girl named Young caused more damage than any army. She had been studying computer science before the invasion. Now she turned her skills against the occupiers. She discovered that the Dominion's orbital bombardment stations relied on software that had been from conquered species, patched together over centuries. The code was ancient, poorly maintained, and vulnerable. She created a virus disguised as a music file, something the surveillance systems would dismiss as harmless human entertainment. The virus spread through the occupation's communication network, lying dormant until it reached the orbital platforms. Then it activated. 3 bombardment stations fired on each other before their crews could regain control. 2 were destroyed outright. The third limped out of orbit and crashed into an ocean. Young was never caught. She died of natural causes 60 years later, surrounded by who knew her only as a kind old woman who liked to hum while she cooked. The resistance was not limited to the young and able-bodied. In Volgograd, a grandmother named organized what she called a knitting circle. The women who met in her small apartment ranged in age from 60 to 93. They spent their meetings making scarves and blankets, gossiping about neighbors and planning assassinations. The governors of occupied territories were primary targets. They were heavily guarded, rarely seen in public, and believed to be untouchable. Knitting Circle killed 11 of them in 2 years. The methods varied: poison in their food, explosives in their vehicles, sniper fire from impossible angles. The Dominion never discovered who was responsible. They suspected organized military cells, not elderly women who brought cookies to neighborhood gatherings. High Arbiter studied these events with growing frustration. The humans were not fighting a war in any sense he understood. They were fighting 1,000 small wars, 1,000,000 individual acts of defiance, each one too small to matter, and yet somehow combining into something unstoppable. He summoned his science officer Al again. "Explain this behavior. They are dying by the millions. Their cities are rubble. Their governments have collapsed. Why do they continue?" Al had spent 2 years studying humans. He had read their literature, watched their entertainment, analyzed their history. He understood them better than any alive, and yet he found himself unable to give a satisfactory answer. "They have a concept they call spite," he said finally. "It means continuing an action specifically because someone else wants you to stop. They will harm themselves to harm an enemy. They will accept defeat in the short term if they believe it will lead to victory in the long term. They do not think in terms of rational self-interest." That is madness. Perhaps, but it is effective madness. Every time we kill one of them, we create 10 more enemies. Every atrocity we commit becomes a story they tell their children. They are building a mythology around this war, High Arbiter. They are turning their dead into martyrs and their survivors into heroes. In 1,000 years, they will still remember this. They will still hate us. Dismissed this analysis as exaggeration, but he could not dismiss the casualty reports. In the first year of the war, the Dominion had lost more warriors than in the previous century of conquest combined. The losses were not militarily significant, not yet, but they were unprecedented, and they were accelerating. The humans had discovered the weakness: time. The warriors needed to sleep in 4-hour cycles, a biological requirement that could not be. Disrupting this cycle caused confusion, hallucination, and eventually madness. The resistance learned to attack in rotating shifts, keeping the awake and on edge constantly. Garrisons that had been secure became death traps. Warriors who had been invincible became shadows of themselves, jumping at every sound, seeing enemies in every shadow. But it was not just the physical attacks that wore down the occupation. It was the psychological warfare. The humans seemed to understand instinctively how to get inside the mind. They left messages on walls, translated into the Dominion's language. They broadcast recordings of death screams on captured frequencies. They learned the names of individual warriors and used them in targeted propaganda. A commander named Al became the first officer to refuse a deployment order. He had lost half his unit in an ambush that should have been impossible. The humans had somehow obtained the patrol route, the timing, everything. They had been waiting. Al survived only because a human sniper missed his shot by a centimeter. When he returned to base, he found a message on his personal terminal. It was from the Resistance, addressed to him by name. It told him exactly how many warriors he had left under his command. It told him their names. It told him where they slept. And it ended with a single sentence: "We can reach you anywhere." Al deserted that night. He was captured and executed, but the damage was done. Other officers began to hesitate. Morale, always a secondary concern for became a serious problem. In the 4th year of the war, something changed. Human engineers had been working in secret, reverse engineering captured technology. They had suffered setbacks, made mistakes, lost lives to experiments gone wrong, but they had also made progress. The first human ship capable of faster-than-light travel launched from a hidden facility in the Andes Mountains. It was small, barely functional, held together with improvised repairs and desperate hope. But it worked. The ship appeared above a Dominion supply station in a neighboring star system. It fired a single volley of missiles, destroying the station's shields, and then vanished before the defense forces could respond. The attack caused minimal damage, but it proved something far more important. The war was no longer confined to Earth. High Arbiter received this news in his command center. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at the tactical display that showed the spreading conflict. In 6 years, a species that should have surrendered in days had not only survived but had begun striking back. They had taken Dominion technology and turned it against its creators. They had transformed from prey into predators. For the first time since the invasion began, considered the possibility that he might lose. The fall of the Dominion did not happen all at once. It was not a single dramatic battle or a decisive victory. It was a slow crumbling, a gradual collapse that took decades to complete. But historians would later trace the beginning of the end to a single moment, the day the first enslaved species rose up against their masters. It happened on a mining world called 300 light-years from Earth. The workers there were, a species that had surrendered to the Dominion 2,000 years before the humans arrived. They had been broken, their spirit crushed by generations of servitude. They had forgotten what freedom felt like. Then a human ship appeared in their sky. It was a small vessel, damaged from a recent battle, limping toward the planet for emergency repairs. The workers watched it descend with a mixture of fear and curiosity. They had heard rumors about the humans, stories that seemed too incredible to believe. A species that had refused to kneel. A species that had fought back against the Dominion and somehow survived. The human crew numbered only 12. Their captain was a woman named, whose parents had died in the early days of the invasion. She had grown up in the resistance, learning to fight before she learned to read. She had seen horrors that would break most people, but she had also seen ordinary humans do extraordinary things. The workers approached the crashed ship cautiously. They expected demands, commands, the casual cruelty that defined their existence under the Dominion. Instead, asked them for help. She said please. She said thank you. She treated them like equals. An old worker named asked her why. Why did she not command them? Why did she not threaten them? She had weapons. She had power. She could have taken what she needed. Considered the question carefully before answering. Where I come from, she said, we fought a war because we refused to be treated like slaves. It would be pretty hypocritical of us to turn around and treat someone else that way. Did not understand the word hypocritical. Explained it. She explained many things during the 3 days her ship was being repaired. She told them about Earth, about the invasion, about the resistance. She told them about ordinary people who had stood up against impossible odds. She told them about Maria Santos, the old teacher who had been the first to say no. She told them about Tom and his harvest machine, about Young and her virus, about and her knitting circle. When the ship was ready to leave, asked if he could come with them. Said yes. 20 others asked the same question, took as many as her ship could hold. Word spread. On mining worlds and agricultural colonies, on factory planets and processing stations, enslaved species heard stories about the humans. They heard that there was a choice other than obedience or death. They heard that freedom was possible. The uprisings began slowly at first. A work stoppage here, a sabotaged machine there. The Dominion crushed these rebellions with brutal efficiency, as they always had. But for every uprising they destroyed, 2 more appeared. The fire was spreading, and the Dominion did not have enough warriors to put it out. Back on Earth, the war continued, but it had changed character. The resistance was no longer fighting for survival. They were winning. Every year, human technology improved. Every year, more captured Dominion ships were integrated into the growing human fleet. Every year, the occupation became more costly and less sustainable. In the 12th year of the war, High Arbiter was recalled to the Dominion. He stood before the Supreme Council, the ancient rulers of the species, and delivered his report. The war on Earth was unwinnable. The humans could not be broken. Every attempt to crush them only made them stronger. The council debated for months. Some advocated for total destruction, using the Dominion's most powerful weapons to simply erase the human species from existence. Others argued for withdrawal, cutting their losses and leaving the humans to their small corner of the galaxy. A few suggested negotiation, though this was considered almost unthinkable. In the end, the decision was taken out of their hands. The rebellions had spread too far. Species that had been docile were suddenly uncontrollable. The Dominion's military was stretched thin, trying to maintain order across 1,000 worlds while simultaneously fighting the humans. Something had to give. The withdrawal from Earth began in the 15th year of the war. It was not called a defeat. The official term was strategic reallocation of resources. But everyone knew what it meant. They had faced a species that would not kneel, and they had failed to make them bend. Humanity emerged from the war but unbroken. Billions had died. Cities that had stood for centuries were rubble. Ecosystems had been devastated by orbital bombardment and chemical weapons. The recovery would take generations. But something else had emerged from the ashes, a new kind of civilization. The humans had fought together, people of every nation and background united against a common enemy. That unity did not disappear when the enemy retreated. For the first time in their history, humanity began to think of itself as a single species rather than a collection of competing tribes. And they were not alone. The who had escaped brought others with them. Word spread through the Dominion slave worlds. Refugees fled to human space, seeking the freedom they had only heard about in whispered stories. The humans welcomed them all. Now Admiral of the Human Coalition Fleet became one of the architects of what came next. She argued against vengeance, against using human military power to punish the Dominion for what they had done. "We didn't fight them to become them," she told the Coalition Council. "We fought them because we believed that freedom matters. If we turn around and start conquering other species, then what was the point?" Not everyone agreed. There were those who wanted blood, who wanted them to suffer as humanity had suffered. The debates were fierce, sometimes violent, but in the end the moderates prevailed. Humanity would build something new, something that had never existed in the galaxy before, a coalition of free species, united not by conquest but by choice. Former High Arbiter lived to see this transformation. He had been stripped of his rank after the withdrawal from Earth, blamed for a defeat that had been inevitable from the moment the first human said no. He spent his remaining years as a minor diplomat, representing the shrinking Dominion in negotiations with the Coalition. In one of these negotiations, he found himself across the table from a human diplomat named Sarah. She was young by human standards, born after the war ended. She had never experienced the invasion directly, but she knew the stories. Everyone knew the stories. During a break in the talks, asked her the question that had haunted him for decades. "Why did you fight? You could not have known you would win. The mathematics were against you. Why did you refuse to surrender?" Sarah looked at the old for a long moment. In his 4 eyes, she saw something she had not expected, genuine confusion. He truly did not understand. He had conquered 11 species, built an empire across the stars, and yet he could not comprehend why a small blue world had refused to kneel. "Because kneeling was never an option," she said finally. "Not really. You gave us a choice between survival and freedom, and we chose freedom, even if it killed us, even if it meant watching everything we built burn. Some things matter more than living." Was silent for a long time. Then he said something that no had ever said to a human before. "I do not fully understand, but I am beginning to." The negotiations continued. The galaxy continued to change. Species that had cowered in fear began to stand up straight. The Dominion, once the most powerful force in known space, shrank year by year as its subject worlds broke away to join the Coalition or simply declared independence. And at the center of it all were the humans, a young species, a small species, a species that should have been crushed in the first days of the invasion. They had refused to kneel. They had fought when fighting was hopeless. They had proven something that the galaxy had forgotten. Will matters more than strength. Principle outlasts power, and freedom once tasted cannot be taken back. The stars had witnessed countless conquests, but now they witnessed something new, a galaxy learning to stand on its own feet, inspired by a species that had refused to kneel.